I didn't enjoy it. In my first race ever, I capsized, didn't complete the race. So I didn't see any talent in that. It was definitely more hard work than talent. All I remember was like a sense of relief. Oh my God, I did it. Because it took me like almost 10 years to try and qualify. All I remember was like a sense of relief. Oh my God, I did it. Because it took me like almost 10 years to try and qualify. I remember I was just crying all the time in the boats. And then I decided to tell myself, all right, let's give 1 week off or 2 weeks off, not rowing. And then when I'm not rowing, I'm always thinking about being back in the boat.
Welcome to Before We Get There, the podcast where we explore people's journeys, how they got to where they are, what keeps them pushing forward, and where they eventually want to get to. I'm your host, Nicholas Braman, and today I'm joined by Aisyah Rafaee. Aisyah is Singapore's first Olympian in rowing and competed at the Rio and Paris Games. We talk about how she got into the sport, the pivots that took her to Australia and eventually the US, what it took to push through moments when she hated getting on the water, adapting to her post-Olympic identity, what she's building now as an entrepreneur, and much more. Enjoy the show. Hi, Aisyah. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi, Nicholas. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I saw that recently you've been competing in high rocks and doing a lot of athletic competitions and different things. How's that been going?
It's been good. I feel like my life is always revolved around athletic competitions anyway.
And so that's one thing I wanted to ask you about, because obviously as an Olympian, you've competed at the highest levels. What's it like now as a post-Olympian and the kind of identity you feel and going and doing these other activities where it's more casual, much more casual than going to the Olympics?
Definitely very different. It feels good knowing that I am still working out. I am still competing. But not necessarily at the highest level. It feels good that I can do things that are more casual. Because it took me a while to get to this stage where I'm like, okay, with if I miss training, it's fine. If I don't win, it's fine. So it's growth.
But I'm guessing you probably still have that very competitive streak in you, right?
Depends on the day, depends on the race, and depends on who I'm racing with.
And so when you go and do these things, how do you decide what? I think you've done triathlons as well and now high rocks. So is it just what's fun for you, what's interesting, or how do you decide which kind of activities you get into?
Yeah, good question. I think the first race that I did after I retired from rowing was triathlon, because it's something that I've never done before. I don't swim, so it was a little bit like a challenge for me to pick up something new. I love cycling and I love running, so that swimming aspect was new, so that kind of pushed me to want to do it. But I tend to, and this is still like a vice for me, I tend to do or compete in races that I know I'm good at, that I know that I will probably be like top 10, or maybe if it's a big race, top 100. So I think what I lean towards is still a little bit of performance.
And are there any performances that you have recently post Olympics career that you're particularly proud of, or any learning a new, like you said, you weren't a swimmer, so that's pretty challenging in itself.
Yeah. The swimming part was, when I did my first triathlon, it was a speed sprint try in Singapore, and I was training in the pool. I think the challenging part was having to race it in the ocean, like it was at East Coast Park. So that was a while. That was when I realized like maybe triathlon is not my thing, because I could actually die in the ocean. But so far, the best achievement, I would say, in like my post-Olympic career would be the marathon. Definitely. I've always loved running. I used to run when I was a lightweight rower to lose weight, just such a bad mindset. But that actually got me faster because I ran a lot. And then when I retired from rowing, went into marathon running, and I did pretty well. I actually qualified for Boston Marathon on my first marathon. So that was when I realized, like, oh, wow, I can actually run.
That's awesome. Let's maybe go back because I saw that originally you weren't a rower, that you started, I think your first competitive sports was actually netball. So how did you discover rowing and what was that like?
Yeah, I started playing netball since I was 10 in primary school. I discovered rowing at the end of secondary school. So secondary four, I remember it was a post-exam activity that my school had where they brought in rowing machines and I was just sitting on the rowing machine. It was an inter-class competition. And they were actually doing, Singapore Rowing at that time was doing like a talent scouting program. So they were looking for a rower to join the national team. So the rower approached me. She was rowing for Singapore and she said I should give it a try. And yeah, I decided to try it out. It wasn't the most exciting thing because rowing is the same thing that you do over and over again. Very different from netball. It's not like you play with other people. You're on the boat, on the rowing machine on your own. So I didn't really enjoy my first few like months of rowing.
Then what made you stick with it and keep going?
I think it's more of like just the challenge that I gave myself. I think I wanted to be in the national. I wouldn't say I wanted to be in the national team because I was already in the national team for netball. I think it was just a challenge, like going through something hard and wanting to prove to myself that I could do it. And it wasn't like it was fun or I didn't love, it wasn't love at first sight kind of thing. It was just, I just wanted to push myself, I think. It was so long ago. It's 20 years ago.
And so do you remember, was it clear like fairly early on that you had talent and you could go pretty far in this sport, or did it?
Oh, definitely not talent because I felt like I was struggling for the first like 6 months. I remember it was just hard. I didn't enjoy it. In my first race ever, I capsized, didn't complete the race. So I didn't see any talent in that. It was definitely more hard work than talent. And then I think the talent came in after that, after I pushed through all the initial challenges. And then I realized, oh, I'm actually pretty fast. I'm actually pretty strong. And then that's when I started to work on my strength.
That's cool. So it's interesting. Singapore, obviously, being quite small. I do combat sports, but even you hear and you see the guys around that are doing wrestling and judo and that kind of thing, just being in the community at gyms, and that's something that'd be much more unusual in somewhere like the U.S., right, where there's so many people doing these things. So I'm curious about, was your family into competitive sports, or how did you get this in you to go on this path to be on the national teams and eventually go to the Olympics?
Yeah, my family is definitely not very competitive or athletic. I grew up with 4 brothers. And out of my 3 older brothers, only one of them was an athlete. And he played soccer. I think my competitiveness came from just growing up with brothers. I remember we fight for everything. Food. If my mom cooks hot dogs or chicken nuggets, if you're last to get the food, you won't get anything. And even like sitting in front of a computer or Game Boy or Sega Saturn, whatever we had, it was always about who's first, like half you are to just, if someone wants to use, you just hold on to the controller. So I think they definitely help that competitiveness. But I think it was also like, as much as my family wasn't very athletic, we didn't go out and play sports together. But there was just a lot of, now thinking back, we went to the park to walk, maybe to fly a kite or something by the beach. So we were always active in a way, but not really like sports specific.
And when you look back, was there a moment when you became better athlete than your brothers, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm faster than you, I'm stronger than you?
Yes, there's definitely a moment because I remember whenever I go running, like around the stadium opposite our house, and I remember like my brother will lap me, and then I started rowing, and then we started running again together, and I remember lapping him. So that was the very vivid moment that I can remember. Oh wow, I'm fitter than my brothers. But other than that, we never like raced together or trained together. So I think it was just that moment that made me feel like I'm better than them.
That must have been fun. How much younger are you than your brothers?
So I have a younger brother who's 2 years younger. And then my third brother is 4 years older. And then the other one is 7 years older. And the other one is 11 years older. So big gaps. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, yeah, that's big gaps. And so then once you got into rowing and you eventually leading the SEA Games, and so how long of a period of learning how to row and getting to be competitive was that?
It took a while for sure. When I first started, so I picked up rowing in 2005. And then, was there a SEA Games then? I think there was a SEA Games then, but we didn't do too well in that SEA Games. I'm just very new as well. And then the goal is always to get better, right? The more experienced you are, the more you set higher goals for yourself. But I remember getting a bronze medal. Oh my goodness. Now my memories are also like muddled and all over the place. But my first biggest, I guess, highlight of the SEA Games career was 2013, where I won the gold medal. And that was 8 years after I picked up rowing. So it took me quite a while to get there for sure.
Wow. So one thing, going back to just my own personal experience again with combat sports, is I always feel like competition is a skill set itself, because you can do things in the training room and in practice, but to be actually good at competing, it's not, you have another element to deal with, this competition, the stress, somebody's fighting their hardest against you and that sort of thing. I guess it could be a little bit different when you're having direct physical contact with your opponents. But is there an element of that in rowing at all? Did you have to learn how to be a competitor as well as being a rower?
I think when you're racing, the hardest competitor you have to beat is yourself, because that's the only person who can bring you down, because you are not, like, nothing else around you is going to affect you in any way. And that's why comparing our sports, your sport seems so much more challenging, because whatever that person does has direct impact over what you do. But in a racing sport, very hardly ever. So you put your head like in your boat, and that's what you focus on. And the only thing that can mess things up is yourself. And usually it's you who mess things up. And I remember going through a period where I'm training so well, like I'm hitting all these really good benchmarks and PRs. And then when I get to the starting line, like I just couldn't row. Like I can race it, but it was just so terrible. I was hitting like the worst timings. I don't even know what I was thinking about. And every performance was just terrible. So there's definitely a different mindset when you're training and when you're racing.
And did you figure out what was going wrong, or how did you get through that and then able to compete after that?
Yeah, I did work with a mental skills coach with that, because that was also the time when I was training for the Olympics, I haven't qualified yet. So what was the biggest kind of challenge was the fact that whenever I go for competitions and race, I put on so much pressure on myself because of the expectations that I put on myself. So how I overcame that was to learn to let go of the expectations, which is not as easy as just like letting go. It was more of understanding where the expectations came from, realizing that I am more than just a rower. Like even if I fail this race or don't do well, it's okay. Like life doesn't end. Like I'm still a human. I'm more than just a rower. But that took a while for me to understand that. Definitely one of the biggest things that I like overcame and learned to manage was just refocusing my thoughts. So when you're racing, you don't think about what other people are doing. You don't think about the outcome. You think about what you're doing, like at that point in time, like the present moment, because that's the only thing that you can control. So just learning to rein in my thoughts and be like, okay, what's important now? Where am I right now? What am I supposed to be doing now? Yeah. And that helped. That helped a lot.
Do you still have to balance that? You mentioned I'm still a good person. I'm still valuable. I'm still great, even if I don't win, even if I don't do my best. Do you still have to balance that somewhat with the desire to win and the competitiveness to make you go your fastest?
I feel that you have to balance it for sure. A good question though. And you need to manage it. You need to find, because you want to, especially as a fighter, you have to have that ego mindset, like I'm the best, because that is the one that like puts you out there. But you also need to know yourself, like where you fall. I always feel like all of us fall in this like range of being zero, which is like maybe a bit mellow, best performer, to 10, where like you need to be super hyped up to perform. And I feel like sprinters are always around 9 or 10 because they're like, yes, I need everyone to stand up and clap for me. But I feel like for sports like mine, you don't need that intensity. You need to move more towards a 5 or a 6 where I'm like, okay, I need to be calm, but I also need to be hyped up. So finding that balance for yourself.
And during this time when you were the 7 years before you won a big competition, what was it like balancing your personal life? I'm sure your family, you needed your family to support, to provide opportunities for you to compete and practice, and as well as focus on your studies and your work. What was that time period like?
I was really young then. So all I wanted was to just compete in the SEA Games and win a medal. So I was already, when I started rowing, I was in school and then I went to university. Balancing school was hard, but I know that rowing is more important at school. So that was easy. But I also made like a promise to my mom that if like she wanted me to finish my studies and then I wanted to row full time, she was like, okay, finish your studies and then you can row full time. So that's exactly what I did, graduated. But then I was working as a teacher and then I decided to take some time off because I realized that my performance was not going anywhere. But at that point in time, making those decisions was to train full time, to let go of everything, family. I didn't have a lot of responsibilities then. And just like training full time was pretty easy because I didn't have other responsibilities other than my selfish pursuit for my dreams.
And everybody was supportive. And so once you got your degree and you were working as a teacher, so like they knew you could fall back on that if you needed to eventually.
I guess they had no choice but to be supportive. It was very hard to gain the support of my mom because she wanted me, because I was her only daughter. She wanted me to be a normal daughter. But yeah, eventually when I started competing for Singapore and started to appear in newspapers, I think she like changed her mind about me and sport. But yeah, gaining her support, gaining her trust definitely took a while. But with my friends and family, they were always very supportive of my goals, especially the companies that I work with. I used to work at Ngee Polytechnic as a student development officer, and I took a long time off to train, and they gave me that time off. And when I go for my time off, the work responsibility has to be distributed between my other coworkers. So they carried the load for me while I was away. And I'm always so grateful for that. So whenever I go back to Singapore, I'm always like, even though like I don't work there anymore, I try to meet up with most of them.
That's awesome. So I think one of the big things that you did is eventually you went to Australia to train for the Olympics. What was that? What led up to that decision, and what was it like?
Yeah, in Singapore, we used to have like part-time coaches, and one of the coaches knew a coach in Australia, in Sydney. So he connected me with him, and basically now what I've learned is you need three important things to be a very competitive athlete. You need a training environment that can push you. So Singapore didn't have that at the moment. That's why I had to go overseas and train. A good coach. So the coach was, I trust him. And the third one is like a good just environment. Like you have a long waterway where you get to row as many kilometers as possible. You have good weather. So like Sydney was just a really good option at that point in time.
Yeah, it's super expensive down there, especially when you're used to the good hawker food here that you can get
Yep.
for it. It's so affordable. And so you did some is it called crowdfunding and got some donations. What was it like and how was the experience doing that?
That was quite scary to do because I've never done something like that before. And I don't usually like to ask for money. Even when I was in college, I never asked money from my mom. I was working part-time as a coach. So that was hard. But it was also very heartwarming knowing that when I did that, I told my story. I was just being very honest, very authentic. And there were a lot of people who supported me. That was when I realized like this journey, like even though I was out there on my own, like I wasn't alone. There's always people who was always going to be supporting me. So that was really special for sure.
And were there any adjustments to being in a new environment, training with athletes from another country, coaches from another country? Did you feel like it was a step up for what you were able to train like in Singapore?
It was definitely a step up because there's more structure in the program. And all I did was literally eat, sleep, train. But the adjustments were pretty hard. At that point in time, I was just having a lot of fun, even though I was on my own a lot. But I'm used to being on my own, especially with training. You're out there on your own a lot. And then like I was just talking to one of the Australian rowers I was training with, and she went on to compete for Australia in two Olympic cycles. And we were talking about the time when I first came to Sydney and I was spending a lot of time on my own. And there was a little bit, I wouldn't say there's a lot, but a little bit of, I was separated from the rest. Like the group, the local group, they had their like parties that they attended. They had like their own little events and I was never invited to all these things. But I was also like in my own like little world. Like I didn't really get that. Like I wasn't affected. Like I knew they were having some party. I wasn't invited, but I didn't let that affect me at all. But thinking about it now, I'm like, oh wow, I was definitely being bullied. I was so ignorant,
Oh, no.
but in a good way.
That's very interesting. But it didn't affect you at the time?
No, it didn't affect me. I knew like they knew each other for a long time and I wasn't, yeah, I felt like that's all right. I'm in a different position, like training out here on my own. I was just very driven to reach my goal that like I felt like nothing could bring me down. Yeah.
Wow. And then the process for qualifying for the Olympics, how many competitions do you have to do? What was it like? Was there like a single race that you knew that you were going to make it, or is it a longer process?
Yeah. So for the first Olympics, which was in Rio in 2016, there was only one race, which was the Asian Olympic qualifier. And there's about 16 countries in Asia that is vying for, at that point in time, it was 7 spots. Yeah, I actually came in like the 7th. I took the last spot. In the race. So there was only one race that you do.
Wow. So was that, I guess, the most pressure-filled race you'd have?
Oh,
until
yeah.
then?
Holy crap, yes. And it was also, I guess, the one and very few races that I pushed myself so hard that I couldn't stand after the race.
Wow. But you made it. When did like the reality hit you that I'm going to get to go to Rio and go to the Olympics?
I don't know. I felt it was more, all I remembered was rowing really hard. And when I crossed the finish line, because I was really close, so in rowing, there's only 6 lanes. And then there's final A, final B. So anyone who qualified for final A is top 6. So they are guaranteed going to the Olympics. So I was in final B. So you have to win final B to get to the Olympic. So the rower who came in second in final B, she was like less than a second away from me. So I was so close to not making it. All I remembered was like a sense of relief. Oh my God, I did it. Because it took me like almost 10 years to try and qualify.
That's awesome. And then, yeah, so what was the experience like going to the Olympics? Did your family go with you to support you? It's about as far as you can go, I think, from Singapore to
Yeah,
Brazil.
yeah. No one came to Brazil. And it's not very normal in my family to travel overseas to watch my race. But it was an exciting experience. It was my first, and also there was a lot of pressure being like the first Olympic rower. There was a lot of, I remember just being bogged down by like media. After I qualified, between qualification to the Olympics, I remember just going through a lot of like interviews, podcasts, TV interviews, radio interviews, that it took a lot of my mental and physical energy that I wasn't focusing on my training. So that was really bad. My preparation for the Olympics was not ideal, not the best, but I went there. It was all right. I had a goal. I reached the goal, and it wasn't like a great race. It wasn't like a race at the qualification where I pushed so hard, I felt like I was going to die, even though I always want that feeling. But yeah, it wasn't like a good race.
And I'd like to try to understand that more. Like, you say you didn't push like, as hard as you could have. What is there something that, like, how do you know and you still have something left in the tank besides, do you know during the race or only after when you realize, oh, I'm not as tired as I feel like I want to be? Or how do you know?
Yeah, I think it's more after the race. And because I've already felt what it's like to give it your all, that you can't stand up for the next 30 minutes. So any other races after that, when you're not feeling that, you're like, oh, I have a little bit more in my tank after the race. But during the race, of course, it's hard, it's painful. And yeah, I think it's more so after the race, you feel that you have a little bit more in your tank.
That's very interesting. And so after the Olympics, you decided to retire, right? How did that decision happen?
I decided to retire because I didn't know if I had the capacity to go for another Olympics or even if it's going to be worth it. I thought I needed to get back to my job and just lead like a normal life, focus on my professional career. But that took me 2 years to decide on retirement because I kept on going back to the boat to row and I hated it. I remember I was just crying all the time in the boat. And then I decided to tell myself, all right, let's give 1 week off or 2 weeks off, not rowing. And then when I'm not rowing, I'm always thinking about being back in the boat. So it was just this phase where I'm like, I wasn't sure of myself. And without rowing, I felt like I was no one. And when I was working, so it was a lot of like office work. I was in an office from 9 to 5. I wasn't like focusing on my work. So my mind wasn't present. So it was a really hard 2 years for sure. I was talking to my mental skills coach then. And of course, the goal is for me to find an identity or a purpose outside of rowing. So that's why I went to triathlon, but it didn't fill the void. How I finally made that decision was, how did I make that decision? I traveled to America because I wanted to just find myself, just doing some soul searching.
Wow, so there's a couple of things I want to unpack there. First of all, after the Olympics, you were still training and you mentioned even while you were doing it, you were crying and not feeling happy. So was it that you were burned out, or what was the emotional part like that was making you not happy while you were doing the sport itself?
I think it's definitely burnout. I felt like I didn't give enough time to like reset before I hopped in the next season. But then there's also no strict rules about what is this time period to get back to a sport. So I think it's just more so like I feel that I am nothing more than just a rower. I felt like my life just revolves around rowing, and without rowing, I'm no one. So it's definitely like an identity loss issue that I was experiencing.
And so now, looking back and being older and more mature and more experienced, do you think there's anything you could have done differently during that time to make that process faster or to get through it more easily?
Yeah, I think I'm going through it right now as well, this stupid retirement phase. But of course, now I'm like enjoying it more. I think if I had a chance to go through that again, it's more don't stress over it. I think I was just too putting too much pressure on myself to make a commitment, like a hard on, yes, I want to be a rower, or yes, I don't want to row. It doesn't have to be black and white. I learned that. It's just the hardest way to learn that there's no black and white in everything. That it's okay to row without competing, that it's okay to not compete and like just have fun in other areas of your life. And if I also had a chance to go back and redo that whole process, make a decision and freaking stick to it. Because I think that indecisiveness was the one that lengthened that whole retirement process to 2 years that made me like go in and out of the boat.
And so, one thing you mentioned is this identity, right? That you were a rower, Olympic rower, competitive rower, national rower. When did you find an identity outside of that that can be clearly defined in a title or a sentence? And how long did that take? Or what did it morph and evolve, or what happened?
Yeah, I think that was when I met my now husband that I realized that I am more than just a rower. I can be a girlfriend, I can be a fiance, I can be a wife, I can be a sister, I can be a friend, I can be a daughter. And I don't necessarily, rowing is just part of my whole identity, and rowing is not not my whole identity. Yeah, that was definitely hard for me to comprehend because rowing was my life. But realizing that no, it's not. It's just part of my life. It's just something that I do. Even if I don't row, I won't die. I'm still a being. I'm still human.
Definitely. So that sounds like it was great timing and the right person for you to meet.
More love for you.
So, yeah, I'm originally from the US, and we all have heard that from my accent. So you went to New Hampshire and you were coaching there, and then you met your now husband. Did you make the decision to move there fairly quickly? What was the adjustment like? What was that whole phase of balancing, trying to find yourself at the same time as figuring out, like, oh, am I going to work here or work there, continue at my existing job, or what?
Yeah, when I was traveling and like doing that whole soul searching thing, I already left my job in Singapore, so I was unemployed. So it was a pretty like easier decision on our part to see whether we move to Singapore or move to the US. So he proposed to me 3 months after we met. So it went very quickly. It went very quickly, and we knew that it was US we wanted to be in, because also if I do end up being in like finding a career in sports or in rowing, it makes more sense to be in the US because it's bigger, more opportunities here. So it went very really quickly. We got married a year after we met. But of course, you move from US to Singapore, like moving is always very hard. You're leaving everything behind. But like you said as well, I'm grateful to find someone who's very understanding, who was able to live with me being still in that transition of, even though I don't see myself as a rower, I still see myself as an athlete. And I remember I was training for marathons, and if I don't train, like I will literally cry when I miss a day of training. I'm like, what is, like, now thinking about it, I'm like, what is wrong with me? But at that point in time, I was still in that phase where training is important, training is life. So he definitely, he definitely went through the highest and lowest points, even though like it's funny because he wasn't there during that retirement period, which I would say the lowest point in my life, but he got me out of it for sure.
That's awesome. And is he a rower as well, or just was able to understand you and learn?
No, he used to row for UMass for 2 years, and then he went into triathlon. So he's more of a triathlete, but he competed in Ironman in the same year I was rowing at Rio. So an Ironman training is ridiculous. It's similar to high level like sport training. And I think he understood the amount of work that I've put in and getting out of it, because I think he was also in the same process of trying to take himself away from not training for another Ironman just because it doesn't make sense. So I think it was similar in a very different way, that the transition process that we're going through.
Okay, cool. So you went through this whole process of almost like decoupling yourself from your identity of just being a rower and figuring out what you're going to do next, and now having a very quick marriage, a new relationship, a new marriage. But then eventually you actually ended up going back and going for the 2024 Olympics. So can you share about how that decision came about?
Yeah. And so it took me 8 years to go back to it. That decision came about. So last year, 2024 was the Olympics. In 2023, at the start of the year, I decided, okay, I want to give it a try since I'm still very fit and strong and I have a job, I have a husband. I'm more than just a rower. I'm more than just an athlete. I feel like I feel more grounded for sure. So I gave it a try. I sat on the rowing machine. My scores were not great, but I was like, okay, like with consistency, I know that I can bring the scores down. But I stopped myself because I was like, okay, this does not make sense. Like, why would I want to go to the next Olympics? I actually stopped trying after a week and then went back to normal life. And then in October of 2023, I was part of this program where they invite Olympians to media train the Olympians to work at the Paris Olympic Games. So they paid for our flight accommodation to Paris. We were trained, and so I was with this group of Olympians, and they are mostly in their 40s and 50s. And we were just talking during dinner, and they were asking me, "Oh, you're still pretty young. Why don't you want to try out for the next Olympics, which was going to come out in a year?" And I said, I don't know, I'm too old. And then they were like looking at me like in a certain way because I'm the youngest in that group. And then it was when I realized, I still can try. So I decided, when I went back from that trip, I landed in Boston. My husband picked me up and I told him, and I was crying, like I was bawling when I was telling him, like, I think I want to try out for the next Olympics. And then from then on, like during that whole winter, I tried to find where I can train with who. So I decided to go back to Sydney because I'm familiar with my coach. I'm familiar with Sydney, with the racing scene there, with the rowing scene. And yeah, that was it. That was like the turning point.
Wow. And so having just talked about processing the identity part of things and the pressure you felt when you made that decision to try again, were there any thoughts of like regret you hadn't been training as much as you could have the time in between?
No regrets, because I knew that my mind wasn't ready. Yeah. I would have gone and trained for a different purpose. I would say when I started training in December, like I knew, like, of course I would have gone and let's just go into this phase in life, being curious about how fast I can go, how strong I can become. So it was a very different mindset at that point in time versus when I tried it at the start of the year.
Wow, that's awesome. Now that you have officially retired, again, and you're doing your own things. You have a business and you do coaching. What's that identity shift, and how is it learning new skill sets in business and in coaching and all these other facets of life that you're doing now?
Yeah, so I actually started my business before the Olympics a few years ago in 2022. And I was already coaching athletes in mental skills, in sports psychology. And that was me bringing my things that I learned as an athlete from my mental skills coach to the athlete. And then it's funny that I was in that position where I'm applying the skills that I was teaching my athletes to my own training, to my own competition. And it's not as easy as just like telling someone to do it. You've got to trust the process. You've got to believe that this thing actually works. Or even though initially when I started working with my mental skills coach, I was skeptical about this whole mental skills thing. But it's just so interesting. Let's say we were talking about letting go of expectations and focusing on the present moment. Like just saying that to an athlete sounds easy. Yeah, just focus on the present moment. But when you are in the thick of it and you're competing and you're like, everything is like coming down towards you, focusing on the present moment is so hard. So that was a really humbling experience for me to be like, I think it's going to make me a better coach now, knowing that I have applied it as an athlete and also as a coach who was competing. And I love that process of learning from being an athlete and a coach. But in terms of like translating my skill set to different areas of my life.
That's really great to hear. And it makes me think about, because I think I'm somebody who's very independent and always wants to go and do things on my own without help. And I think coaching in general has become more and more popular in recent years, life coaches, career coaches, this sort of thing. And I've been starting to look into myself, and it makes sense, right? To have a professional, as you said, to hold you accountable, to be able to guide you, somebody who's been there before. It's an accelerator to you trying to reach your goals, right? If you can have support and if you can learn from somebody else, why not, instead of trying to do everything yourself?
Sure.
So that's really great to hear your perspective on that. So one final question. I'm very interested to hear your answer, because I always ask people about their future goals. And now that you've navigated the identity shift, but you've been at such a high level of competition, so I'm very interested to hear, if I talk to you again in 5 years, what would you like to be able to tell me that would make you feel that the time from now until then was successful for you?
Wow. 5 years, I would say I have been able to bring my business to a level where I'm proud of it, where it actually brings me money. And I can safely say, wow, I've made it as an Olympian and as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur, as someone who have always said that, I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs, therefore I shouldn't start a business, to someone who has started and has a successful business. So that's where I want to be in 5 years.
Awesome. Okay, great. Where can people find you? We'll put links in the show notes. Where can people find you to learn more about you, if they want to work with you as a coach?
Yeah, so I am very active on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is Aisyah. That's ARIESYAH. My business profile is 3HP Athlete. But you can always reach out to me on my Instagram, my personal Instagram. I try my best to reply to everyone.
All right, awesome. We'll put the links. Thank you so much, Aisyah, for joining me today. It was great to talk.
Thanks, Nicholas.
Thank you for listening to Before We Get There with your host, Nicholas Braman. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Before We Get There Podcast. New episodes are released every other Thursday morning. See you next time.